Hello, everyone. Welcome to Do More with Devo. I am Adam Foyt, your friendly neighborhood technical marketing engineer. We have a list of people with us today that are going to be presenting some content on today's webinar. We are going to get started in just a few minutes. Let's just give everybody a few more minutes to jump on here. It's right at the top of the hour. So for those people out there that are wrapping up their meetings a little late, for those meetings that are dragging on a little longer, let's give them some time to wrap those up and jump on. But we'll get started here in just a few minutes. I'll introduce you to the rest of the people on the call and cover the agenda, and we will kick things off in just a few minutes. Bear with us. It's a lovely day here in Knoxville, a little warm for this time of year. I'm joining you from Knoxville, Tennessee, where it is a lovely, warm, clear fall day. What about you out there, Nick? What's the weather out there by you?
It's beautiful today. Fall finally hit the Raleigh, North Carolina area after it seemed like summer dragged on forever. So yeah, we're about 80 degrees and sunny, and it's crisp in the morning, so I can't complain.
It's certainly a lot better than it has been for sure. About the same weather here in Knoxville. What about you, Juan? Is it fall in Boston?
The leaves are starting to change. We're starting the days at like 40 and 50 degrees and ending at 80. So it's normal.
Wow. And it's not quite that cool here yet. All right, I think we're going to give it just one more minute here. I still see some people trickling on here on the attendees. Looks like the rush has stopped. We'll give it just one more minute here. Yep, there's 3 more that just jumped on. I know lunch is always a tough one because probably jump up from your desk, go grab a quick snack or something, and then come back. So just one more minute here, and we will kick things off. Don't want to start too late because we do have quite a bit to cover today. All right, looks like a few more. All right, it looks like it's tapering off. So let's go ahead and get started. So welcome again, everyone. My name is Adam Foyt. I'm sure you have been on a few webinars with me before. I'm your technical marketing engineer here at Devo. Joining me today are the esteemed Nick Nelly, one of our principal SCs down there in the Raleigh, North Carolina area, the Research Triangle, and also everybody's favorite community leader, Juan. Juan will be going over some of the recent new content in Connect, some of which I believe he's created himself from scratch. The stuff that I know I use, and I think you guys are going to use too. So we're going to cover all that today. Let's go ahead and get started. So once again, Nick Nelly will be handling the bulk of the live demonstration today. He'll be going over a lot of the really juicy tips and tricks, and then Juan Del Rio will be going over some of the new content he's created on Devo Community. Some of the stuff that Nick will be talking about specifically on today's agenda is getting more out of all things data search. That means diving into the query bar and the query editor for tips and tricks. Exploring the search tree and how you can use that to quickly iterate on searches. It's one of my favorite features and one of the most underutilized features, I think. Taking a look at keyboard shortcuts, right? You're not an expert at Devo until you know the keyboard shortcuts. And then we're just going to give a quick overview of stat counts and then dive into some of Juan's juicy nuggets from Devo Connect, one of which I'm really excited about. And then we'll have Q&A at the end, of course. So feel free to fire off the questions at any time, but we will get to the questions at the end simply because we got a lot to cover and we want to make sure that we get through the material before we tackle the questions. So that's today's agenda. I think without any further ado, I will pass it off to Mr. Nick Nelly. Nick, take it away, please.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. As Adam said, the goal of my portion of this as I work to grab the screen share and talk at the same time is to really walk you guys through kind of we'll call it an intermediate kind of user's view of data search, some helpful tips and tricks around, navigating the UI, navigating the toolbar, maybe optimizing your queries, leveraging some keyboard shortcuts, leveraging things like our micro index. So really to kind of take your data search usage and hopefully elevate it to the next level. So, we'll kind of start at the basics and really take a step back at what does Devo do when you initiate a query in data search? And so as you are aware, Devo is a parse on query engine, right? All data in your Devo domain is stored in its raw format. It's never transformed. But what's happening is you go to initiate a query. In this case, maybe I'll open up my firewall all traffic table. As I go to initiate to launch this query, Devo's grabbing that data from its storage location. It's pulling it in that raw format, and it's running it through the parsers built into our query engine to present this virtual view of the table. By default, what Devo is going to present you with is that full data schema. For those of you who are familiar with LinQ or any kind of SQL-based language, you can think about this as kind of an implied select all. So in this case, we've got maybe 20 or 30 different columns here, all presented to us by default. And this really gives you kind of the benefit of you don't necessarily have to know the data schema you want to work with before you open it, before you initiate that query. Devo is going to do that heavy lifting for you. It's going to parse that data out. It's going to present you with all of the possible data that you might need for the analysis, the query, the alert that you're building. Now, once you know and understand that data schema, Devo makes it very easy for you to then focus on, the fields or the data points that might be relevant to the analysis you're doing, the question you're asking. Often as you come in and you start that process of building out your query, building out your content, it's important to understand what's the question I'm asking, and what are the data fields that might be relevant to get to that answer. And once you have that information, then you can leverage a couple of different tools in the Devo platform, the Devo data search, to kind of narrow your view here, narrow your focus of the data. And so we'll walk through a couple of those right now to help you kind of manipulate this virtual table view of your data. So the first one that we'll look at on, by your default toolbar is this kind of second option, which is the field manager. The field manager you can kind of think of as your precision view or precision manager for your column view. Gives you the ability to kind of quickly and easily toggle on and off certain fields in your data, to get very precise with, I want exactly these fields view, or maybe I want these specific ones removed from my view, but gives you a lot of precision in how you're doing that. And so, for example, I can kind of quickly toggle on and off all of my columns. I can come in and turn on just a select few. Maybe I want source IP, destination IP, whatever it might be. Gives me a lot of kind of granularity and precision to how I set up my table view to then start building my query, working with my data. What's also really helpful in this field manager is you see this filter bar here in the top. So this makes it very easy to say, look, I want to work with everything that has to do with the IP address information within this data. Maybe I want to know what are my fields that have, we'll call it source port or source zone, all of my source information. So with this field manager, I can quickly and easily select which fields are relevant to the analysis that I want to do, the question that I'm asking, and adjust my view to that. And again, what's important here, because of the way that Devo is working, is because this is a virtual view of the data, I'm never losing any of that underlying data. I'm never transforming the underlying data. I'm never even adjusting a view that another user might be taking. So that's the field manager. Again, you can think of this as your scalpel, your precision tool. But another option is kind of this fields drop down here. And if we think about the fields manager as your scalpel, the fields tool here is kind of more of your hammer, right? It's going to give you more of a, give me everything or give me nothing kind of option. And so here we can see I've got, a couple of different options that I might use here. Hide selected, hide unselected. I want to bring all of my fields back. I'm going to quickly refresh my view here, but gives me more of that hammer option to say, okay, give me everything, give me nothing, give me just what I've selected, and kind of go from there. So let's pull all my fields back on here. So in this case, maybe I'm looking at it and I'm selecting a couple of things that I want. This columns option, fields option gives me the ability to then hide all those unselected fields. So a little less precision. I don't have that drop down those check marks, but I can quickly and easily turn things on, turn things back off, hide selected, hide unselected. So a couple of different tools for manipulating your view, narrowing the focus down to those relevant data fields. With one of our recent releases, we've actually introduced another tool that kind of helps you do this as well. And you can see that here on kind of the left under the Show Fields option. The Show Fields option is very similar in functionality to the Fields Manager. So you can see we've got those individual toggles that I can turn on and off and kind of see those columns appear and disappear from my view. It's also got, select all, deselect all options. It's got that filter option. But what's powerful about the field viewer is it supplements this functionality of manipulating your view with giving you some really powerful information about each of those fields, each of those variables within your underlying data set. So for example, we can see for each of our fields, we've got a data type information, but we've also got some information around the number of distinct values present in that field. So for example, in my source column, I can see I've got 3 distinct values. And if I click into this, I can actually see exactly what those values are and the distribution of those values within my data. So I can see that in this particular union table, 72% of my events are coming through my Juniper firewalls, 16% through Palo Alto, and the remaining about 12% through my Cisco firewalls. So I can see that distribution of data. I can see that breakdown. I can see kind of my top values. And from here, I can also quickly and easily kick off different filters on these values. So for example, if I'm looking at the different actions here, I see my firewalls are blocking about 51%. I can use this fields viewer to quickly create that filter step into those individual values. And I can do that in my current window. I can also open a new tab with that filter pre-populated. So this fields viewer gives me the ability to not just adjust my view, but maybe get even more granular by applying some filters, understanding the distribution of the data, but just gives me the ability to dive into the metadata, dive into that underlying data, adjust my view, again, to answer the questions that I'm asking with the relevant data. So those are kind of the tools within this data search view itself, but we also make it easy for you to do this from the data finder as well. So if you know what fields you want before you even kind of go into that search, so again, if you're familiar with the schema of the data, you know what data fields you want to use before you even begin, you can within the finder, when you get to the table that you're initiating that query on, by leveraging this table info dropdown, these ellipses, you can see there's this select fields option. So this will give you that field manager view before even initiating the query. And this will allow you to change from that implied select all query statement to a more manual select statement, right? Give me these 3 fields and then initiate the query. So as I initiate this query, I can see my view only has those 3 fields that I've selected. And I can see in my query code editor that that select statement is built out for me. Now, the difference in where you initiate that select statement or that field manipulation, whether in the query or from the finder itself, is that by initiating it from the data finder with this kind of manual hard-coded select statement, if I then open up my fields manager or my fields viewer, I'll notice that none of those other columns are present in the schema. So I've manually overrode or override, I don't know, I was a math major, not an English teacher, but I've done a manual override of the schema of this table to just the columns that I've selected. Now, again, because this table is created virtually on the raw data, that underlying data is never transformed, all of those additional fields are still present in your underlying data. And if I want to bring in additional columns that maybe I hadn't done in my initial select statement, I can always do that by simply adjusting the select statement in the code. So for example, if I wanted to bring the source field back, and you can see Devo still knows the full schema, so it'll give me those options to auto-complete to bring some of those values in. Maybe I want to bring action back in, maybe, I don't know, we'll do source port. So I could always bring in any of those other fields that I did not in my initial select statement by simply adjusting the select statement in the query code editor. And now I can see those fields are brought back in. They're obviously now available in my field manager. So it gives me the ability to have full flexibility, full customization over the view of the data that I'm working with. So a couple of tools there for manipulating your view, for helping narrow your focus, which certainly is your building your queries, building your alerts. Some tables might have hundreds upon hundreds of different columns. So being able to narrow down to just those that are relevant to the session, to the question you're asking, definitely helps streamline that analyst experience. So from there, we'll look at a couple of different keyboard shortcuts that can really help you, again, streamline your experience within the data search platform. So if I'm, again, looking at this firewall data just by default here, if I wanted to, for example, filter on this action column, of course, with Devo's point-and-click UI and our wizard builder, I can very kind of quickly and easily build that out using the visual editor, right? So I might open my filter tool. It might populate some different functions that I want to run. Maybe I want not equal here, whatever it might be. And I can build that out step by step in my query editor. But I can also do things using a keyboard shortcut to help kind of streamline that process. So for example, if I want to filter this action column on the value deny, if I highlight that value in my table and then press enter once, that will open up that filter operator with those values pre-populated. So you can see by default now the operation is equals, the field has been selected as action, it's pre-populated the deny value into my query statement here. So it's very quickly and easily kind of pre-populated that filter step. It's built out my query. I can then just press enter again to apply that filter to my data. And again, I do this as many times as I want to. If I want this particular source IP, press enter once, enter again, apply that filter to my data. So using the enter key, very quick and easy way to kind of apply filters to your data without having to necessarily build out those steps. And of course, once you do that, I'll just pick a destination IP, kick that off. I can then always adjust the operation to not equal, so using any of the other ones. So I can still streamline that even if I'm using a different operation than, say, the equals operation by default. Another really powerful keyboard shortcut that we have in data search is really designed to help you get a better view of an individual or a subset of events. So by default, within data search, you have this table view that you see here, which is that have the list view, which is more of your traditional JSON view, gives you kind of a slightly more vertical view of the data. Again, see the parsed data, see that raw underlying message as well. So a couple of different views that you can use in the data search platform, or the data search application itself. But I can also use our event viewer to view in more detail individual events or even a subset of events. And so, for example, if I were to select this row of data to open up my event viewer is one, I can use the event viewer click here, but I can also simply hit the spacebar. So by selecting that event and hitting spacebar, that's going to open up my event viewer, which then gives me this vertical view of the data. I can now see see the values for this particular event. I can see the data types. So it gives me the ability to quickly dive into all of the data within an individual event. Or if I were to say select, a subset of events, hit spacebar, that will then open up my event viewer with that series of events. So I can dive into each of these events, view the data in this vertical view. I also can very quickly and easily download this data in a variety of different formats. So it makes it easy to kind of dive into individual events, dive into a subset of events, quickly view that, as well as kind of download and extract that out of Devo. So again, a quick keyboard shortcut with that space bar to open up this event viewer. Another powerful tool that we have in data search, and I'll do this and say we'll go to one of the Amazon tables, is often within your various data sources. What you have is you might have a nested JSON or a JSON structured either a field or even the entire message within your data. And so while Devo has all of our out-of-the-box parsers and we work a lot to kind of break out those JSON values, we know that sometimes, especially in things like AWS, you might have kind of appended columns at the end that have, maybe a separate JSON object of additional data. Maybe you're bringing in a new custom data source that's in JSON format. And so we've got a tool in here, our pretty print, kind of our JSON data operator that you can access quickly and easily in data search by simply kind of clicking into one of these JSON fields or JSON values and pressing the P key. So if I hover over this and click into this additional data event, kind of JSON, and I press P, that's going to open up my JSON viewer. And the JSON viewer really brings a couple of different functions into data search. And so one, it's going to give me a more easily digestible view of that JSON. So I can see the different fields, I can see the different layers. So here, we've got kind of a single layer, but I might have something like, I think we've got in this Akamai data, a JSON that maybe has multiple layers, where then, again, opening up that pretty print is going to very quickly and easily allow me to see all the different layers and the hierarchy within this JSON. So again, I click into that event, I press P, I can now see all these different layers within the JSON, all in this single view. So it gives me a quick and easy way to understand JSON data, to visualize JSON data in the Devo data search. But it also gives me the ability to, and I'll come back to my Amazon because it's a little smaller and easier to work with, to also do some additional parsing out of this JSON data. So you notice that in this JSON field, I've got these kind of checkboxes next to each of these different variables. And what I can then do is select any of these and use this extraction tool to automatically quickly parse out this JSON data into its own individual columns. So as I highlight these, I click extract. You can see that Devo is going to automatically extract the field name. It's going to detect the data type. It's going to give me the ability to adjust these as I need. But then I can simply click extract, and that's going to parse out that JSON into all those separate fields. So now instead of having a single JSON field with all this additional data, I've got 6 columns where I can extract easily that underlying JSON values. So really helpful if you are parsing out JSON data, again, whether that's a full message that's JSON, individual kind of subsets or data fields within a message, such as we have with AWS. So a really powerful tool. Again, that's that P key to open up your pretty print, where you can then view JSON data and easily extract it, parse it out into its own columns as you need to. The last keyboard shortcut that we're going to look at, and I'll come back to my Akamai here because this has got the field I want, has to do with how you can leverage our CyberChef integration, the CyberChef interface directly in data search. So if you're familiar with CyberChef, what CyberChef is, hold on now. Let me refresh my session here and we'll see what's going on. But CyberChef is a tool that allows you to do data operations, a variety of data operations, data transformations. So it's got a lot of these built-in kind of tools. Oh my goodness, my browser is not working. So we'll kind of skip on that, but it gives you the ability to transform data, to decrypt data, to transform from, base 64 to pull out date times, things like that. And I'll see if I can get that working later on here, but there's a key shortcut that you can use for CyberChef where if you hover over a value and press C, that'll automatically input that value into your CyberChef recipe. I'll come back to that. We'll see if I can get my browser to work and maybe I have an update issue on that. But that's another keyboard shortcut involving leveraging CyberChef. So the next piece we'll look at, in addition to those shortcuts, is the ability to kind of edit and customize your toolbar. So your toolbar here, by default includes, I think, these 10 or 12 different icons, things like your basic query operations, the ability to create alert, to dive into the query code editor, some of those field managers. But it certainly doesn't include the full corpus of capabilities that you have within data search. So if we come here to this drop down on the far right, we can see we have tons of different tools, tons of different functionality available to us in data search. Things like, again, leveraging those different operations, building out charts, different things to rename, save our query, adjust our view. And with the toolbar, I can grab any of these and drag those to my toolbar for quick access. So for example, if I know that one of the things that I like to do or do a lot in my analysis is to create visualizations, create plots, you'll notice as I hover over this in my drop down, my hand changes kind of from this pointer to this grab tool. So I can grab this plots icon and easily drag it to my toolbar. And so that gives me the ability to kind of create those quick shortcuts to the various capabilities, the various functions within, the Devo data search, and give that shortcut access on my toolbar. Similarly, of course, I can always grab and remove things from my toolbar by simply grabbing them, dragging them over here to this drop to remove option. So it gives me the ability to adjust my toolbar to add icons, remove icons, as suits kind of my preferred workflow. By default, if I were to adjust my toolbar, this is going to be kind of session specific. So if I log out, if I start a new session within my browser, within Devo, I'm going to be taken back to that default kind of toolbar layout. However, I can persist this. I can save this by going to the drop down to this workspace option and saving the current workspace. So it gives me that ability to kind of save that custom toolbar, to persist any changes that I've made for future sessions, additional sessions, things like that. So in the same vein of kind of the helpful tools across the toolbar here, one of the things that I want to take a step back on and touch on is, how Devo supports the quick and easy adjustment of time intervals that you're looking at when you open up a data search. So your domain will have a default kind of time interval when you open up and initiate a query. By default here, it looks like I've got the last hour. So as you go to the time interval selector, you've got a ton of flexibility and different options for the interval of data that you're looking at. And so this comes from a lot of our preset intervals. So for example, the last 15 minutes, the last hour, the last 6 hours, I can quickly and easily adjust and apply these. I can do things like snap to, today, yesterday, where, instead of a rolling 24-hour window, it's going to kind of default back to, starting at midnight, right? So go back to yesterday, to this week, to today. So I can do, drag and drop across. You may want to look at, Monday and Tuesday of this week. So I can adjust my time intervals very quickly. But you can also see as I select these different intervals, there is an underlying code to these intervals. So I can also come in and always adjust these and say, now minus 1 hour, or now minus maybe the last 3 hours. So I can always come in and create a fully custom time interval. And maybe here I want to go from 3 hours ago to 1 hour ago, and apply that to my data quickly and easily. So a lot of flexibility enabling you to adjust the time of the data that you're looking at. In addition to changing the time interval, you also see we have this RT icon, and this allows you to turn on and off kind of the real-time data flow. So if I turn this on, maybe I'll change this back to the last 15 minutes, but I'll turn on my real-time data flow. What I'll see is that as new data hits the Devo platform, it's going to be pulled into this view in real time. So that gives you that true kind of real-time data stream. So as any data comes in, it's going to be automatically presented in my view and added to my queries, aggregations, whatever it might be. I can always turn this off and then kind of work with more of a true snapshot of data. The last tool for those time intervals, and you'll notice that back here on our toolbar, is this time interval history. So this gives me the ability to quickly kind of navigate back and forth between time intervals. So you can see, here's my last hour. Maybe I've got the last 6 hours. All of these different intervals and these time intervals that I selected in my query session, I can quickly navigate back to. Again, I can do maybe the last hour with real time. Can quickly jump back and forth. But this is also really powerful because you can see it's got all of my open searches, open queries available on the left. So I have access to all intervals that I've done in any of my queries. So if I jump over to, my Akamai query here, and maybe I'll change this interval to, I don't know, look at the last 12 hours. And then I go back to my firewall query, that interval that I applied in a different query is going to be available for me to apply within this, whoops, wrong icon, my interval history here. So I can see this gives me the ability to use intervals across queries, which can be really helpful if I'm looking at data in different data sources, but obviously I want to correlate that time. I want to map those to the same time period. So I can also kind of select these, do a multiple kind of apply of different time intervals. So it makes it very easy to manage the time within both an individual query, but also as I have multiple queries open in a single session. Awesome. Well, moving right along, we're going to look at, how Devo stores and kind of saves your queries. So by default, Devo saves every query that's run within the web browser and via the API. And what's powerful about Devo is that what it's saving is not just the end result, that end query code, but within your session, it will save kind of a breadcrumbs view of every step that you apply. So again, here, if I am looking at my firewall traffic table, maybe I'm going to build out a query where I'm looking at, I'm going to do a group statement where I'm grouping it by the source, and maybe we'll do 5 minutes. So I'm going to apply a group statement. Maybe I'm going to aggregate and get kind of a count for each of these time periods. Maybe I'll also go ahead and actually I've got my nice chart added to my toolbar here, so I can drag that over. So I'm going to go ahead and quickly create this basic line chart, right? I can see the number of events coming through my different firewall sources in 5-minute intervals over the last hour. What I can see here across kind of the top of my table is this breadcrumbs view of each step that I've taken within this query. So I can navigate back to these at any time, can go back to the start, I can go back to any point in my query, and navigate kind of in either direction, right? Then I can come to my end of my query as I'm needed. So it's saving each of those breadcrumbs. So I can go back, I can view the data at that point. I can also make minor modifications, right? If I want to change the way I was grouping this from 5 minutes to 10 minutes, can quickly apply that grouping, go to my end product here, and now I've got that line chart created on 10-minute intervals. So I can go back to those breadcrumbs, make changes, jump back and forth of the data, as needed. I can also access the history of all these steps in what we call our node tree. So if you are, come from an analytics background, you're familiar with kind of data analysis, and certainly if you're working in Devo, you probably are, that a really common kind of workflow as you're getting into your data is to isolate a set of data and ask a series of similar but slightly different questions of it, right? What does the data look like in 5-minute intervals? What does it look like in 10-minute intervals? What does it look like for this subset, for this subset, for this subset? So you're doing slight iterations on a similar query structure over and over again to get to that final answer. And what the Devo node tree allows you to do is really kind of persist all of those different offshoots of your query process and make it easy for you to kind of jump back and forth between them. So you can see here in this particular node tree, I've got a couple of different branches that map kind of the steps that I took in building this simple aggregation query. So here in kind of my left, my first branch, I've got that grouping in 5-minute intervals. I can see the data, can see the chart that I created. I can also jump off to where I have this grouped in 10-minute intervals. So it's saving and persisting every step, every offshoot that I've made in this query process, and I can navigate to any step in any of these branches quickly and easily. Similarly, let's say as I'm starting a new branch, so again, I go back to the very beginning, maybe this time I want to look at just where I have, deny actions. As I do that, I can see a new branch is created in my node tree. So not only is it mapping in real time those steps that I'm taking, but it's also, where it can, based on previous steps that I've taken, giving me the ability to kind of auto-complete this query with the steps that I've run before. So instead of having to rebuild my grouping at 5-minute intervals and rebuild, that aggregation, I can quickly just auto-complete by clicking into the node tree, and now it's going to build me that visualization where it's auto-done the grouping, it's auto-done the aggregation, it's even auto-created that plot for me based on the previous steps that I've taken. And so now I can see I've got my line chart that shows me the blocked actions by firewall source in 5-minute intervals over the last hour. So this node tree is a really, really helpful tool in terms of, visualizing and navigating your full query session, as well as it could be something about, building out those queries more efficiently with some of these autocomplete options. And, going back to how Devo saves your queries, what's powerful about how Devo saves your queries is that it's going to automatically save not just this final node in your node tree, but it will save your entire session. So as you're jumping back in at a later date, if you're sharing this with other teammates, they're going to get visibility into the full query structure, the full process that you undertook to arrive at that final analysis. Before we look at that search history and kind of show how that works, as you can see here on the left side, by default, Devo names the queries based on the table that they were initiated on. So I've got my CDN Akamai query, I've got my firewall all traffic query. So it helps me understand, obviously, what data I'm looking at, but doesn't give a ton of information about what's being done. And you can imagine, as I've had 10 different firewall queries just in the last half hour, if I go to my search history, seeing just firewall all traffic is not going to give me a ton of information about what that query was. And so, Devo make it very easy for you to rename those queries to help them be a little bit more informative as you're looking back or sharing those with teammates. And so to rename a query, there's kind of two different ways you can do that within the Devo UI. The first is actually here on the far left toolbar. If I go and I hover over and kind of select that firewall all traffic name, I can rename the query directly here in the toolbar. So maybe this is I'm just going to call this firewall traffic example. Can quickly rename that query and maybe give it something that is a more informative name. I can also rename queries here in my dropdown by going under this search action option, and then there's a rename tool is here as well. So I can open that up, give this a name, can reset it back to the default. It gives me the ability to rename those queries. A really helpful trick for how you're naming your queries, especially as you start bringing in more and more teams and more data, and start having saved and favorited queries that are going to be relevant for certain groups, is to start applying different kind of naming conventions and tags within how you name your queries and even your active boards. So maybe this is something that I know is going to be relevant to my NOC team or my SOC team, or it's relevant to a certain investigation. By applying those, some sort of standardized naming convention to your queries and your active boards, that'll make it really easy then when your users are going into that search history. And I'm going to go ahead and close this out, but going into the search history and jumping back into that. So here I can see that renamed query. I can see it in the search history. I can also, if I'm an admin user, view searches across all users. But by applying that standardized naming kind of tag, now I can do things like to show me all the queries that are relevant to the NOC team, to the SOC team. So it gives me the ability to quickly and easily find relevant queries within the search history. And then, like we talked about, if I open up this query, I can see that full node tree has been persisted. So it gives me all those different offshoots, gives me the ability to see that full session, access that at any time. So, I think another really powerful thing within the way that we at Devo have designed our UI is, we kind of hit both sides of the coin, right? We have this really powerful visual editor that you've seen with our wizards and our error checks, and kind of drop through and help you build this out with ever writing a single line of code. But you can see kind of throughout this process, we're always tying together the visual editor with that underlying LinQ language. There's a very tight integration, tight relationship between those pieces, because one, we've got users that prefer each type of workflow, right? Some like to get in, especially when you're first learning Devo, and leverage the visual editor. And then as you get more comfortable with LinQ and you kind of learn through that, being able to then get in and quickly make changes to, the underlying query code itself becomes really powerful. So I think that's one side of it, but there's also times that, it might just make more sense from a workflow perspective to leverage the underlying query code or the visual editor itself. And so a good example here that I can show you guys, and we'll go into our log trust web activity piece here. So let's say I'm looking at, this particular table. What I'll do is I'll just filter to this user ID field. And so here I can see I've got this, encrypted user IDs. It got 5 different pieces to it, all separated by, kind of a dash. I have a standard delimited field. And maybe what I want to do as part of my analysis, part of my kind of query here, is I want to start breaking out this user ID into, the different sections. I want to parse those out into their individual columns. So maybe, kind of for the first step here, I'll do that going through kind of the visual GUI, right? So I know I'm going to use, I'll call this, section 1. I know I'm going to use my split function. The split function allows me to, break out a field based on a set delimiter within the data itself. So in this case, I'm going to split that user ID field. I've got all my lovely error messages, kind of guardrails to make sure that I'm getting the correct syntax. Maybe I'm going to break this out by that dash separator, because I can see that's how this data is kind of separated and split. I know that I'm going to want to grab that first piece, which in the split function is going to default by starting at 0. So I can kind of set this up with the visual editor, which is going to, again, give me those great guardrails, help me prevent any sort of syntax errors. I can now apply that, and I can see kind of that first section broken out. I can see that query code created for me automatically, and that kind of gives me the first piece, right? But I've got 4 more of these that I want to do. And, rather than having to go through that visual editor each time, ultimately all I'm doing for those next 4 steps is leveraging the same query syntax that I've already done 4 more times. So in that case, it can really make more sense to just leverage, copy paste. Now I want to grab that next section and call it section 2. Then I want to grab the section after that, call it section 3, so on and so forth. So it gives me the ability to quickly leverage either the GUI or the code editor in a way that's going to help me more efficiently kind of create these queries. And so something like this, if I'm doing manual parsing, if I'm extracting key value pairs, and I've got, instead of just 1 or 2, I've got 5, 10, 30, 40, 50, leveraging the underlying query code editor can really help work through that more efficiently. And I know that what I've done, and as you start getting to where you're pulling out 50, 60, 70 different key value pairs, being able to use the initial kind of query builder, that visual editor to create that first statement, and then even use something like Excel where you can concatenate and extract values and kind of automate a lot of that, and then just do one giant copy paste for all of this, can really help streamline that workflow. So again, just highlighting the value of leveraging both the easy to use visual no code UI, but also there are going to be times where leveraging kind of that query code editor, or the query code editor can also really help save you time. Another great example of where I think the query code editor can be really helpful, and it actually used to be something that was only available in the query code editor, but is this idea of leveraging nested functions. So leveraging a function within a function all kind of in one step. So an example here, and I'm just going to kind of, again, filter down to just the value I want. So here I kind of have this source host field. These clearly are IP addresses. Maybe I want to do things like I want to run a query step to identify, are these public IPs. So I can quickly kind of open this up, and I can do my is this public function, default function in Devo. But what I can see here is I've got an error value where this field has to be an IP. So by default, if I kind of look into this, I can see that this is stored as a string value. So before I can work with this, I've got to convert this to an IP field. So I could do this in 2 different steps. I could use a toIP function, create a source host as IP column, and then run this is public function on that new column. But maybe I'd rather kind of do this all in one go. Maybe I don't want to create a bunch of additional columns that I don't necessarily need or aren't relevant to my final answer. And so that's where I've got this ability now, both within the query code editor and within the query building UI, where I can nest and kind of layer those functions on each other. So here I might do, this toIP4 function. And what I can see is what this looks like is I've got a function now within a function. So it allows me to do, kind of multiple things in one go. So I can now create that field. It's going to run through those operations in order. So it's going to grab that source host as a string, cast it as an IP value, and then run it through that is public function. So another really powerful tool that, again, used to be something that required the query editor, but now is built in, and so you have kind of that ability to work with that in both ways. Awesome. Adam, I know we're a little short on time. I've got one more thing I can show, but I want to make sure that Juan has all the time he needs.
I think go ahead, Nick. Yeah, go ahead. If we need to go over, we'll just go a little bit over.
Perfect. Well, I will keep it quick. So the last thing that I want to show, and rather than build this out, I'll kind of jump into an example here. And this really gets more towards kind of query optimization, right? So behind the scenes within the Devo kind of query engine, we've really got two key pieces to how we're optimizing your query. And the first is what we call kind of our file system index. And this has to do with how we store and tag the data, right? All data coming into Devo is going to be stored and segmented based on who owns it, the time that it comes in, and then based on that tag structure, right? What is that data? And so that really ensures that all of your queries are running only on the relevant data. Devo knows where that data is. It can quickly reach out to just the relevant data, run that query, and that alone is going to give you massive, massive speed on your query response times. Now, there is a second process that kind of runs alongside that that can help optimize queries even more. It's not required by any stretch of the imagination, but it is something that for the right queries can help optimize that search performance. And that has to do with what we call our micro indexes. So while we are not indexing your data on ingest, we do have a process that runs immediately after ingest that will look at all of the underlying data, will look at that raw message, and it will go through and it will tokenize each piece of that message. And when we say tokenize, what it's going to do is every section of that data separated by any common delimiter. So in this case, this username field, I've got nick.nelly@devo.com. What the micro index system is going to do is it's going to look at each of these, in this case, 4 parts, and it's going to add a token to flag each of those. So Nick's going to get a token, Nelly's going to get a token, Devo gets a token, Com gets a token. So all of those get these little micro tokens, these micro indexes, so that then when you do a query to look for those values, it can really help speed up that performance. And so there are a couple of different functions that I want to walk through quickly to highlight how you can leverage those micro indexes, maybe some of the limitations of some of these functions, but also to highlight that the tokens, you're not required to do a token search. So the first one that I want to do is what we call a toktains function. And if you can think about it, toktains is really a contains token function. So if I were to look at this nicknelly@devo.com username, I can use the toktains function to look for full tokens within this value, right? So in this case, I'm looking for a full piece from delimiter to delimiter. And if it has it, I'm going to return that true value. So if I were to run toktains on username for Nelly with a lowercase n, which I can clearly see here is in the username, I'm going to get that true value, right? It's the full token. It's delimiter to delimiter. It is case sensitive. So lowercase Nelly is going to match lowercase Nelly, and I'm going to get that true value. Now, this toktains function is case sensitive. So if I were to do that same toktains function, I'll actually pop this out so we can see it a little better, but I was going to search for capital Nelly, I can see that this is going to return false. Yes, Nelly's the full token. It's delimiter to delimiter. But because I'm searching for capital Nelly, I'm going to get that false value. Now, we do have what we call a case-insensitive toktains, and you can see that here with this weak toktains. So if I do a weak toktains search on username for anything with capital Nelly, that's going to return any Nelly token regardless of case. So again, in this case, I've got lowercase Nelly, even though I'm searching for capital, because I'm using that weak, that case insensitive, I'm going to get that true value. So this toktains function or weak toktains is going to be really helpful if you know that the value you're looking for is going to be that full token, right? Full delimiter to delimiter. Now, toktains is a function that will leverage and only leverage that full microindex system. So if I start searching for partial substrings, so for example, I search for Nell instead of Nelly, you can see I'm going to get a false value. By default, toktains does not do substring searches. Now, there are ways to do, and you can check out our documentation on toktains, where you can do, okay, if there's things on the left, that's okay. If there's things on the right, that's okay. But by default, toktains will not do a substring search. So if I search for Nell, I'm going to get this false value. So looking at toktains and weak toktains, it requires that the value you're searching for is that full token, that full index. Now, like we said, you're not required to leverage the microindex system. We still support all of your substring searches. We still support that kind of wildcard search. And there's a couple of different functions you can use for that. But the one that I'll example here is, this has function. So if I were to do this has function on username, and again, look for that partial substring, now I can see that I'm getting true for that Nell value. Has, again, like toktains by default, is case sensitive. So if I were to search for capital Nell, I'm going to get a false, right? I'm not going to get a hit on this particular value. But just like toktains, we have a weak has function as well. So weak has gives you the ability to do a substring search, case insensitive, not necessarily leverage that microindex system, but again, leverage our tagging and still return that quick response time. So again, just to give you a quick overview of how our micro-index system works, a couple of different functions that leverage or don't leverage the index, and how you can use that to kind of optimize that final step of calling your massive needle in a haystack type searches. So with that, I think that is the end of my kind of tips and tricks, and so I'll stop sharing and try and leave Juan a little bit of time here to jump in and kind of walk you guys through some of the exciting stuff he's got with Devo Connect.
Sure, that was all great stuff. Thanks, Nick. Juan, over to you, please, sir.
Thank you very much. And Nick is a hard act to follow. Hello, everybody. And of course, a special hello to all the community members I already see in the attendee list. Let me move this presentation forward. Wait, nope, now I hit that. Bam. Okay, here we go. Nope, yeah. You see that? I moved it forward, good. Devo Connect. So Devo Connect is an exclusive user community for Devo. And by exclusive, I mean that registration is approved so that you are a verified member and have access to Devo before you join. It is composed of clients and Devo SMEs, including Nick Nelly, so you can find them in the community and ask them questions. And it's designed to speed up your adoption of Devo and optimize your workflows. You can come in and ask any questions or find any information as a central information hub. An information hub isn't that great without a good search engine, so we have an amazing one. When you search fractions of words or full words of what you're looking for, you're going to get answers from peer questions with detailed SME responses, exclusive articles, knowledge-based articles, self-service how-tos, customer use cases, plus all the content on Devo Docs as well. It's a federated search. So if you wanted to find something on Devo Docs quickly, you can come to Connect and put it into the search and you'll find it. And it's a single place for all the product updates with all details. Just the product updates for September, you can see here, we had a platform update, a SecOp update, Flow, SOAR, the Mitre Attack Advisor, and catalog updates for Devo Exchange, as well as all the collectors. And so that you don't miss anything, you can click on the subscribe button right on the product updates category, and it'll send you notices whenever something new comes up. If you haven't been, you can go to www.community.devo.com and register, and I will approve you. I have the window open ready to go. But then you can just click on product updates and then subscribe and get advantage of all the product updates coming as soon as they're available. And one of the custom use cases, so this is some of the unique content you're going to find on Connect, created by a customer, shared on Connect, improved by the community through the replies, and then revisited by the Devo team to optimize the whole thing and give you a really good scenario. This is the kind of level of responses you're going to get on the community. And some of the content that we highlighted, the link queue operator discovery resource is the resource that I had mentioned that I created. It's to help you find the right operators in link queue when you need them. So you can segment them by class, you can segment them by the data type, and start finding and undiscovering operations that you might not be using that you might want to use to optimize your workflow. And I have that in a full list, a filterable smart sheet, and a PDF that you can have with you all the time. And as an additional resource, you can join one of my Ask Me Anythings. That happens every month. You can find the link inside Devo Connect. And you can ask me questions there, or you can see what we're building next and what's coming next on Devo for you and get advanced notification.
I want to tell everybody for sure you want to download the link operator filterable smart sheet. It is incredibly useful and it is a great go-to resource to have on your desktop. Trust me, you're going to want that.
And any feedback that we get from that, I'm more than happy to incorporate it. And I'm working on a couple other things for you guys. So the next AMA, we'll have some goodies. And with that, we can open it up to questions.
Yeah, I see a comment down here from Corey Crook about an advanced training session with these type of topics. nobody on this call actually does the training, like the online training and certification stuff. That's handled by a different team. And kind of what we want to do with these types of webinars for our existing customers is to, give them material that isn't kind of covered in the training. The way I like to think of this material is, the training is good for 101, 102 level type of stuff. And this is starting to get into that 201, 202 type of material. And this material is certainly geared for everybody that's already in Devo training at some level or already completed the Devo training at some level. So I think we are the team that does the training and certification is looking at creating additional training materials. But until that is done, until we've kind of, I think, decided on this is the curricula that we want for that, next level, intermediate level, we'll just continue to pump out this kind of stuff on an ad hoc basis until we formalize that training. But that's a great suggestion, Corey. And I know that they're looking at creating that additional training material, not just for, this sort of stuff, but also around Devo SOAR and case management and some of the other new features hitting the platform. Next question, also from Corey. How do we set up default time specific to log source types? I'm not sure I understand that question. Certainly setting up time frames, specific through the time picker, but I'm not sure what he means by the log source types. Nick or Juan, do you guys know what he might mean by that?
Yeah, so I think for, setting up that default time interval, so when you do initiate that query, kind of what it's set at, that's set at the domain level. I don't believe there's a way to set that for individual sources, but that's certainly kind of a feature request that we can take back and set up that more granularity. But right now, that default time interval is going to be set at the domain level for all queries. You don't have that granularity down to the individual log types.
Yeah, that's an interesting approach. I guess I haven't seen it the other way around. The way we typically do it is you set your time frame and then you're querying one or multiple data sources, right? From whatever tables you want based on that time frame that you selected. So the time series is kind of like the shared parameter. I haven't seen it the other way around. How do I access the alias editor menu? I'm going to default to you on that, Nick. I think he means from the column alias editor.
Yeah, I'm not sure I fully follow the question. I don't know, Corey, if you're able to put a clarification in the chat at all.
And why he's doing that. Multiple subnets, not knowing the source or destination. So this would be like if you wanted to say select all, from this subnet where it matches this, this range.
Yeah, so there are functions to do that, and it can be done with some of our default functions. You can also leverage lookup lists there. Probably more of an in-depth answer than.
Yeah. But certainly
help with your CSM team, things like that.
Yeah. Will there be a webinar to explain CyberChef since there's some issues? Yeah, the issue was I think the on24 thing, the way it formats the thing, whenever Nick tried to show that, it was just not rendering right in his browser. But yes, you know what? That is an excellent. I think that's an excellent topic to maybe explore in a future webinar. The CyberChef plugin, as well as a few other plugins, like third-party plugins that Devo uses, and how to leverage those plugins. I think that might make another good kind of tips and tricks or do more with Devo webinar topic for sure. I'll explore that, as well as some of the other, more exciting plugins with Devo. That's a good note for another topic. All right, I know we are at the top of the hour. Thanks everybody. Thanks Nick for jumping on. I think that was really helpful. That type of content that's not really covered in the training, but gets everybody to that next level is really helpful. I hope everybody enjoyed it. And Juan, thanks for going over the stuff you're doing on Devo Connect as well. And one last thing, everybody go out there and download the LinkQ operator guide. It is the LinkQ Bible is what we're kind of calling it internally. It's a super useful resource. So until the next Do More with Devo webinar, I will see you all, and good luck out there. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.